The Time Will Tell, an appreciation of the constant and extremely valuable teaching of Billy Edward Albert Meyer by Daniela Byler, Switzerland. When I think back to the Zete about 25 years ago, when I wrote my first bumpy articles for the Voice of Aquarius Time, unpracticed and very modest in linguistic expression, I almost get chicken skin. Stones and Zeit were the first two topics I dared to write about. The fact that I dared to write articles at all was quite courageous for me. Now that I'm more intensively involved in writing articles for Wassermannzeit, it's like scales falling from my eyes. How impressed I was even then by Billy's incredibly eloquent and captivating texts, and I can still hardly believe how much more detailed, illuminating, comprehensible, and even more apt he has since formulated every sentence and dealt with every subject with catchy, sophisticated, and coherent images, true and correct in content, every single passage through and through holistically and in an uplifting sequence. His descriptions are precise expositions that really leave nothing to be missed in order to make even the most convoluted factual situation more comprehensible. Sensitive, realistic, and knowledgeable, with appropriately chosen descriptions and terms, Billy Edward Albert Meyer establishes plausible and catchy connections between the most difficult circumstances. He also masterfully understands how to express the most diverse representations, as frequently found, for example, in the contact reports, in a mischievously humorous way and in language spiced with witty terms, so that no one gets bored reading and understanding the meticulously elaborated texts. A long time has passed since my first attempts at writing for Aquarius Time, not without continuing to write, but undeniably in a way that lacks almost nothing to support a person untrained in writing, as I still was in the 1990s, so impressively. The instructive exemplary function of all the writings that have meanwhile caught my attention is clearly due to Billy's masterful use of language. In the process, his infinite knowledge as well as the wisdom that can be successfully translated into the reality of everyday life flow in more and more often, and I can meanwhile apply his catchy writing with a kind of inner presence as tiny gifts of thought, thereby appreciating them at the same time and somehow tapping into them. What I still struggle with, however, are the difficult attempts to put down in writing what I try to bring out of the unconscious into consciousness, whereby I am very critical of my shaky explanations and change, add to and adapt them several times. However, the fact that I still do not succeed in presenting complex facts in simple sentences still needs constant practice and also specific remarks from my very esteemed proofreading colleague Marianne, who together with me pre-corrects all the texts that appear in Aquarius Time. The texts Billy writes are so consistently thought out and built on such a solid foundation that neither the interested reader nor the serious reader would discover ambiguities in the slightest turn of phrase or get tangled up in the torrent of words. Indeed, it seems almost impossible not to get lost. Everything Billy writes is comprehensible, meaningful, and purposefully written, and even more so, coded. These extremely valuable swinging waves of the code, which only he knows how to write, even reach readers who do not speak German. It is enough to read the words aloud, and the coded meaning can already penetrate the consciousness in order to bring its vibrations of truth, logic, peace, understanding, wisdom, and openness to bear. To convey factually correct and deliberately simply formulated contexts in such an eloquent and knowledgeable way is incredibly impressive. Billy's texts show his skillful mastery of language, and at the same time a comprehensibility that is unparalleled anywhere else, but especially in the studied elaborations of scientifically educated specialists. Billy Edward Albert Meyer is not concerned with puffing up arguments, trying to convince someone or baiting them with seductive turns of phrase. On the contrary, critical self-thinking is stimulated in order to understand the correlations and to learn to classify them in ever new areas. in order to be able to order one's own thoughts in thinking and perceiving reality, and to develop them in a goal-oriented way. This intelligently thought-out approach makes interesting and rewarding offers of understanding possible, which Billy makes to everyone with his texts, in that he does not transfigure anything and certainly does not plausibly gloss over anything or exaggerate it with foreign words. Conscientious learners are challenged to combine things themselves, to recognize cross-connections, and to include higher-level themes in order to progress in consciousness in an evolutionary way, by learning to question new things, and thus to broaden their horizons ever more clearly. The fact that in this way a better understanding can also be built up for intricate problems, confused factual situations, and hidden connections is a valuable and at the same time reassuring fact for all of us. After all, how often are we challenged to speak our minds, to explain ourselves openly and honestly? By this is not meant to defend ourselves or give an account, or to confirm something that makes sense to us, but simply does not fit into the blinded believer's worldview. Then, these masterfully chosen connections and formulations by Billy become a supportive aid that can help even a suspicious opponent, a generally insecure person, or a notorious doubter to enrich his knowledge with neutral and purposeful facts. Reality is always the focus. Interpretations derived from it are offered as a balanced aid to understanding by Billy in many ways, sometimes with comparisons, examples or parables that allow one to recognize, follow, and apply the harmonious basic attitude in the formulations as his distinctly wise view of things in the confusing facts. And above all, to see behind the glossy facades of the would-be scribblers. Surprisingly, these are often psychologically trained luminaries. If someone even lays out a trick question or a sticky affirmation of their academic knowledge as bait to disguise the truth, often by asking leading questions, then with the help of infused logic and neutrality, an apt answer can be given quite threadbare and unmistakable from the considerations Billy purposefully makes. And this in turn shows that self-reflection bears fruit, and that insightful thought processes can explain contexts much more aptly. Of course, understanding and accepting the wisdom in an interpretation is a different matter. If prejudiced or undiscerning readers are cross and only hear the catchwords in every formulation without wanting to understand their meaning in context and without even wanting to think about it, then good advice is expensive from the outset. Then, effectively, valuable pearls are emptied out in front of doubters who can never get to the bottom of the truth because they do not want to. It is also important to know that no matter how the disagreeers react, you know what is correct because you have learnt to think and combine honestly, and you orient your goals and your ability to understand towards the truth, and not just parrot slogans and arguments that have been chewed up for you by imaginary scientists and other intellectuals. Facts that are supposed to convince you in an intelligent manner and that come across as, oh so scientifically, well thought out. Do you sometimes get frustrated by so much know-it-allism and belief that you could actually save yourself the trouble of uncovering the truth? Then stay calm, think again, and above all, illuminate the nonsense in the challenge. If one knows Billy's approach and how inexhaustibly he fulfills his mission in the venerable sense of instructing the ignorant, the not yet self-thinking, and the ignorant lowly intelligent, those who are not capable of thinking for themselves because they are conceited quick thinkers, then one inevitably recognizes the lousy pretexts, even lies and cowardly insinuations of the would-be sublime, and can parry them with relish. No single lecturing word is too much for Billy Edward Albert Meyer. No answer too laborious, and no knowledge too precious not to try to speak the truth straightforwardly and bluntly, to cultivate it intensively and courageously at all times, and to write it down even under the most unfortunate circumstances, because this is how it can have the most lasting effect. And Billy can sing an unmistakable dirge about this. He does this, however, without complaining, in order to present to us all the truth of creation, with its inherent causes and effects, down to the last detail, with all his enlightening and instructive words. The enlightening process of attaining more knowledge is then dependent on the will and effort of each individual student, namely, how deeply and honestly she or he wants to and is able to dive into the truth and its reality. It is very important to ask oneself honestly, do I want to know something or just believe? This is the all-important switch in thinking and learning, and under certain circumstances, this is the insurmountable challenge for know-it-alls, troublemakers, and other conceited people. Purpose of the Creation Energy Teaching. The Creation Energy Teaching was previously called the Teaching of the Spirit, but because the time has now come, it will henceforth be called Creation Energy Teaching by its correct name. From time immemorial, the teaching of creation energy has been called the teaching of spirit because of the traditional misnomer of human consciousness as spirit, which is fundamentally animated by pure creation energy. This creation energy, which since time immemorial has been wrongly called the creative human spirit, that is to say, spirit form, has its seat in the roof of the midbrain, which is called the Mwa paired node, that is to say, Wa colliculus superior. This creation energy, hitherto called spirit, that is to say, spirit form, is solely the factor of enlivening the personality block with its entire consciousness. But this creation energy is also distributed filigree in and over the entire body, and thus also into every organ. About the term spirit, Wikipedia explains the following. Spirit, ancient Greek pneuma, ancient Greek nous, and also ancient Greek psyche, Latin spiritus, mens, animus or anima, Hebrew ruach and Arabic ruh, English mind, spirit, French esprit, is a term used inconsistently in philosophy, theology, psychology, and everyday language. The following is now to be explained briefly, which will, however, be discussed at length in a later place in a teaching capacity. Spirit! Explanations and explanations concerning the term spirit, as it was formerly called according to the teaching of spirit, so also as teaching of truth, teaching of spirit, teaching of life, is now and henceforth correctly called creation energy and creation energy teaching, by an acting study of the teaching, which is further designated by the correct word term teaching of truth, teaching of creation, energy, teaching of life. This designation is therefore henceforth to be understood as an effectively correct meaning, so that everything can be correctly received, grasped, interpreted, comprehended, and also comprehended in every specific as well as related context. By way of introduction to the explanation of the purpose of the creation energy teaching, it should first be made clear that it has always been the case that students who are concerned with the creation energy teaching, formerly called the spiritual teaching GL, study it effectively or simply sniff around in it out of curiosity, and thus create confusion within themselves because they cannot understand the whole thing. But this actually means that in this way only many questions arise, to which profound answers and information would be necessary, but which cannot be given, because these can only be answered properly by a person who is thoroughly acquainted with the matter of the doctrine of creation energy and with its values down to its deepest depths. If now, for example, human beings come to the teaching of numbers, Kabbalistics, or astrology, or other and factually informative fields of knowledge, or where these can be found in extensive writings of the Figu, Evrite, then the following results. The persons who deal with astrology assume, as a matter of course, that just because these things are mentioned in the spiritual doctrine letters, they must adopt them as their own and deal with them. However, this is not and by no means the opinion regarding the teaching, because these fields of knowledge are only briefly mentioned and touched upon in the GL, but not explained in more detail, because they are only pure aids for the human beings to learn something about their own personality and its dispositions within a narrow framework of the general, but in no case more. Consequently, Kabbalistics and astrology are not to be studied, but only the information is to be absorbed, and no examination of it is to be carried out. For the whole of astrology is a matter full of fictions, that is to say, conceits, false ideas, illusions, poetries, assertions as well as unrealities, which are foreign to any reality. Every form of astrology carries within it only the sting of new dependency and another form of deepening faith and sectarianism, which is fundamentally not the purpose of the teaching concerning creation energy. The actual meaning and purpose of this teaching lies in the training of one's own consciousness and in the conscious orientation of one's personal thinking, personality, development, control and acquisition, and learning of ethics and morals, which as a whole consciously form true humanity and thus also correspond to the behavior patterns aligned with the law of creation. The whole thus carries within itself the inviting values to work specifically on oneself through conscious efforts in order to develop in this way into a balanced, reasonable and tolerant, peaceful and understanding, as well as patient and righteously contented human being. The doctrine of creation energy calls upon the human being to form himself into true human beinghood. Consequently, he moves behaviorally out of the reach of any human being who effectively does not consciously concern himself with ethics and morality in such a way that he integrates them into his life and existence. The ethically and morally educated human being, first, endeavors to put everything and anything in order in his thinking and in his feelings, as well as his state of mind, before he makes his decisions and begins his actions and deeds, because he knows that he must first and foremost begin with himself in order to do everything correctly, especially when it is a matter of approaching other human beings through correct behavior and implementing everything correctly. Any form of creation, energetically just evolution, as it is unfortunately completely misunderstood by the majority of people due to false religious believing assumptions, which also include the truth-twisting misunderstandings and misinterpretations, is in any case and first and foremost an evolution of the conscious and self-directed, independent and self-determined thinking of each individual human being. This also includes their implementation of the whole, which is necessary in language, behavior, action, and deed, but which proves impossible if ethics and morality are not consciously learned to a wider extent. This is because the false, evil, incorrect, and bad qualities deposited and nested in the deepest character are not dissolved and neutralized, but are able to break through to the outside and have an effect when a moral low point appears.